A group of friends takes a shortcut during a camping trip and encounters unsettling signs of danger in the woods, culminating in a chilling encounter with a mysterious figure who seems to defy explanation. It started off as such a simple idea, a weekend camping trip to unplug and unwind. It was Ella's plan, mostly. She's always been the practical one in our group, so she picked the spot, a national park that barely anyone visits anymore. There was supposed to be this hidden waterfall out there way off the beaten path. Mark, being Mark, hyped it up, calling it the adventure of a lifetime. I should have known better. We got there mid-morning on Saturday, loaded with snacks, camping gear, and way too much confidence. The marked trail to the waterfall was long, like 6 miles one way, but Ella had it all mapped out. Stick to the trail, she said, like some sort of mantra. She even made us download offline maps on our phones. But Mark, as usual, had other ideas. It's just a shortcut, he said, pointing to this faint, overgrown path branching off the main trail. Saves us at least 2 hours, trust me. Ella hesitated, but Sophie was already snapping pictures of the mysterious trailhead, and Liam was joking about how we were basically starring in our own survival documentary. Against her better judgment, Ella gave in. At first it wasn't bad. The path was narrow, sure, but kind of beautiful in a wild, untouched way. Sophie kept stopping to take photos of random mushrooms and twisted tree roots. Liam kept cracking jokes about how the Blair Witch is totally going to get us, and even Ella started to loosen up. Then we found the first sign. It was a torn piece of fabric, red and faded, snagged on a low branch. Weird, Ella said, pulling it free. Mark shrugged it off, saying it was probably from some hiker. But as we kept going, there was more: a single hiking boot half buried in the dirt, an old flashlight smashed to bits, and those scratches on the trees. They were deep, jagged, and random, like someone had been hacking at the trunks with a knife. Ella wanted to turn back, but Mark was stubborn. It's just junk people left behind, he said, brushing past her. We're almost there. You can't quit now. That was the last time I felt anything close to safe. By the time the sun started setting, we realized we were lost. The trail had completely disappeared beneath the undergrowth. Ella was pissed, but Mark was still trying to play it cool, saying we'd find our way back if we just kept going. Then Sophie pointed out something that made my stomach drop. We've passed this tree before, she said. She was right. There was a dead tree with this huge hollow near its base. We'd passed it at least an hour earlier. Somehow we'd been walking in circles. That's when we heard the snapping of a branch, loud and deliberate. Ella froze. Did you hear that? Liam laughed nervously. Probably a deer or something. But it wasn't a deer. The sounds kept following us: twigs snapping, leaves crunching, sometimes the faintest shuffle, like someone dragging their foot. Whoever or whatever it was, they stayed just out of sight. Mark whispered for us to keep moving, but Ella motioned for us to stop. Who's there? She called out, trying to sound brave. Silence. Then came the whistling. It wasn't a tune, just this sharp, high-pitched whistle that cut through the trees. Sophie grabbed my arm so hard it hurt, and even Liam stopped joking. Ella whispered for us to move, fast but quiet. We stumbled into a clearing, a flat patch of ground with a crudely built fire pit in the center. Around it were makeshift stakes driven into the ground, each one topped with something disturbing. Animal skulls, bleached white, with their jaws wired open. We need to go. Now, Ella said, her voice trembling. That's when we saw him. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows. A man, or at least something shaped like one. He wore a tattered coat that hung loose on his thin frame, and his face was wrapped in some kind of cloth, leaving only his eyes visible. They gleamed in the fading light, cold and unblinking. Mark stepped forward, like he was about to say something, but the man raised a hand, a slow, deliberate gesture that froze us in place. Then he pointed, not at us, but past us, deeper into the woods. We didn't stick around to find out what he meant. We ran. I don't even remember which direction, just away from him. The sounds of the forest blurred together, our own footsteps, Sophie crying, Liam cursing under his breath. At one point I looked back and saw him again, moving through the trees like he was gliding. By some miracle, we found the marked trail just as the sky was turning gray with dawn. A park ranger spotted us and brought us back to the main camp. We tried explaining what happened, but it sounded crazy even to us. Still, the ranger took it seriously and promised to investigate. A few hours later, he came back with a confused look on his face. "There's no clearing," he said. "No fire pit, no skulls, nothing." We didn't argue, we just packed up and left. None of us talk about it much now, but I'll tell you this, I'm never taking another shortcut again. A solo camping trip meant for relaxation turns into a harrowing ordeal when an eerie silence, abandoned campsites, and a shadowy figure reveal that something is watching and it's not human. Let me tell you about the scariest night of my life. It's something I'll never forget, no matter how hard I try. It all started when I decided to take a solo camping trip. I'm a nurse, and my job is demanding the long shifts, the constant stress, the emotional toll. Sometimes I just need to get away from it all, and camping has always been my escape. I've been doing it for years and consider myself pretty experienced. I've faced bad weather, wildlife, even getting lost once, but I've always managed. This time was supposed to be no different. I chose a well-known campground deep in the woods, about 3 hours from the city. It's a spot I'd been to once before, years ago, and I remembered it being peaceful and beautiful. But when I pulled up to the entrance, something felt off. The place was completely deserted. No cars, no other campers, nothing. The sign at the entrance said it was open though, so I figured it was just an off weekend or something. Honestly, I didn't mind having the place to myself. As I was unloading my gear, this guy came out of a small cabin near the entrance. He looked like he'd been living out there forever, gruff, a little dirty, probably in his late 50s. He introduced himself as Rick Dawson, the caretaker. "You here alone?" he asked, squinting at me like he wasn't thrilled about it. "Yeah, just me," I said, trying to keep it casual. He frowned and shook his head. "You shouldn't stay here," he muttered. "Not overnight." I laughed a little, thinking he was joking, but his expression didn't change. "Why not?" I asked. He just stared at me for a moment before saying, "It's not safe. If you've got any sense, you'll pack up and head back before dark." I thought about leaving right then and there, but I brushed it off. I mean, what was he going to say? Ghosts? Bears? I've dealt with both before, and I wasn't about to let some cryptic warning ruin my trip. I picked a campsite about a mile in, near the lake. It was beautiful and quiet, too quiet actually. Usually you'd hear birds or the occasional rustle of leaves, but there was nothing, just this eerie, oppressive silence. I told myself I was being paranoid and set up my tent, got a fire going, and settled in with a book. Around sunset, I started hearing noises. At first it was faint, a twig snapping, maybe an animal moving through the brush, but then it got weirder. Footsteps. Not the quick, light steps of a deer or a raccoon, but slow, deliberate human footsteps. They'd stop whenever I stopped moving, like someone was matching my pace. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe even Rick trying to mess with me. I stayed close to the fire, trying to shake the unease creeping over me. But as the night went on, the noises got worse. Whispers, so faint I couldn't make out the words, but they were definitely there. My heart was pounding, and I kept spinning around, shining my flashlight into the trees, but I couldn't see anything. Around midnight, I decided to check out the area. Maybe I'd find some other campers and laugh about how spooked I'd gotten. Instead, I found abandoned tents. 3 of them spread out along the edge of the lake. They looked like they'd been left in a hurry. One still had a sleeping bag inside, half-zipped, and another had a cooler with food that had long since gone bad. That's when it hit me something was very, very wrong. I ran back to my campsite and started packing up. Forget toughing it out, I was leaving. But as I was shoving things into my bag, I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the light of my fire. Tall, motionless, watching me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. No answer. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a camping hatchet, and held it up, ready to defend myself. But the figure didn't move. It just stood there, almost like it was daring me to do something. I don't know how long we stayed like that, me gripping the hatchet and them just standing there. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my pack, left most of my gear, and bolted into the woods. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from that thing. I spent the rest of the night stumbling through the forest, too scared to stop, too scared to look back. I could hear something following me, always staying just out of sight. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, that same deliberate, unhurried pace. When dawn finally broke, I found a road and flagged down the first car I saw. The driver must have thought I was insane, babbling about figures and abandoned campsites, but they took me to the nearest town. I reported everything to the authorities, but when they went to investigate, they found nothing. No abandoned tents, no figure, not even my campsite. It was like none of it ever happened. To this day, I don't know what I saw or what was out there. All I know is I'll never go camping alone again.